The story isn't over, not even close. That's what Jill Abramson's daughter wrote on Instagram on Friday, 2 days after Abramson was fired from the New York Times. This morning, we're talking about the outcry that has followed her departure. You know, the fact of the matter is that Abramson chose not to leave the Times quietly or act like it was her decision. So what's going to be next for her? Well, this morning, CNN confirmed she is still planning on delivering a commencement address at Wake Forest University tomorrow. What might she say? Is she a victim of a double standard for women in the media? We'd love to ask her, but she and representatives of the Times all declined our interview request this weekend. But Arthur Sulzberger, the Times publisher, did issue a combative statement on Saturday, pointing out why he thought she was such a bad manager. We've put it on CNN.com for you to read. Now let's bring in three people who know a lot about this shakeup and can help shed some light on it. Dylan Byers, a media reporter for Politico, and Lisa Belkin, my former colleague. She wrote for the Times for decades and left in 2011. She's now the senior national correspondent for Yahoo. And Rebecca Traister, a senior editor at The New Republic. Thank you all for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Good to be here.
Lisa, let me start with you in the middle here. Since we both wrote for the Times, are you as angry as I am about how badly this has all been handled?
I am mystified. Yes, I'm angry. I'm angry for Dean, who deserved a better ascension to this job that he was always going to get. I'm angry for Jill, and that however she managed, and there's a lot of question about that, she deserved a better exit. And I'm mystified about the Times. I mean, how can the premier journalism entity in the world handle a story so badly?
And Rebecca, following up on that, you called it humiliating for her. Describe what you mean.
Well, I think I want to be clear about that word humiliating. I think that the way that it was done was disrespectful and sort of designed in some way to humiliate her, to make it clear that she was canned. Now there is reporting that's been done that said she chose to be fired and not to resign. But the sort of wording and the send-off that Arthur Sulzberger gave her, she's a historic figure. She's the first female editor in 160 years at the New York Times. This is a major event to have a female editor at the New York Times, and her departure, especially, after only 2.5 years, deserved much more of a respectful send-off, a sort of cataloging of what her achievements have been, whatever her failings may have been, whatever the reasons for her firing. It's been disastrous on every front.
Let's talk a bit about the management skills, because both of you brought up whether she had management failings. And I want to turn to Dylan here in studio and talk about that, because you wrote that piece about a year ago that people now look back at and say it was prescient, that you were the first to identify some of the problems. In a nutshell, what were they, according to your sources?
Sure. There was a feeling, certainly not among everyone, but among a large portion of the staff, that she could be difficult to work with, that she could be brusque, is one word that's been used, mercurial, just essentially that she, an extraordinarily talented journalist with many years of experience, was not quite the right person to lead a newsroom.
I'd like to, if I may, I'd like to talk about the characterizations of her as brusque and her management style as bad and difficult to work with. I'm sure that those things are true. I'm not questioning the veracity of Dylan's reporting on that, and I certainly have heard about all kinds of, discontent about how things are in the newsroom and about her management style over the years. I would say that brusqueness, directness, abruptness, short tempers are not unusual in newsrooms, in media, at the top of major corporations, and certainly not at the New York Times, where, there's a history of incredibly intense, abrupt editors. Right. Just 2 editors ago with Howell Raines, staff used to say that, there was one report at the time of his exit that he ruled the newsroom using fear. Abe Rosenthal was probably a very brusque editor. So I think that while it's not to say that those accounts are inaccurate or in some way, it is true that we have to consider how we read those qualities in a female leader versus how we've been conditioned to accept them in male leaders.
And if I may, Brian, what I'm speaking to here is it's, I think, deeper than that. I think certainly if you look at what the publisher, Arthur Sulzberger, has said, is that he had deep frustrations with issues relating to her management. I don't think these frustrations simply had to do with maybe tense conversations, or maybe a feeling that she was being too forceful. I think the frustrations certainly go much deeper than that and have to do with ways that she managed that got in the way of the newsroom functioning in a healthy manner.
she's been paid less than men in similar positions, she says, going back 10 years now. And women are, as a rule, paid less in newsrooms than men are. So that has also caught fire as part of the narrative here. And that is concerning. That is something that is larger than just Jill Abramson and whatever argument she was having with Arthur Sulzberger.
That's why this may matter in the long run. Speaking to female staffers at the Times, my former colleagues at the Times, I hear a lot of concern about issues of promotion and pay. Let me quote two female staffers, of course, on condition of anonymity because they're concerned about speaking publicly. One said to me, "We are so far behind where we should be." Another said to me, "I've been really amused to see all the men I work with say, no, this isn't real. This is a real issue." Rebecca, do you have that same sense? And more importantly, what can be done about it?
Well, one of the interesting things is that under Jill Abramson's tenure, there was a lot done about it at the Times. There were a lot of women promoted. One of the things, Amanda Hess wrote a terrific piece for Slate about young women at the Times who felt mentored and felt encouraged in their careers by Jill Abramson. And that's another element in this dismissal that, again, I'm not suggesting that she shouldn't have been fired because of it. There may have been any number of reasons that she legitimately lost her job. But there is a story about gender and parity in newsrooms and, of course, in many other realms across the country when you lose a woman at the top who has done very public work in bringing more women up behind her.
And look, it would be impossible to suggest that questions of sexism are not at play when you're discussing the workplace, when you're discussing matters of equal pay. At the same time, I think that we do have to be open to the possibility that she might have legitimately been fired because of issues of management and that it was not an issue of gender. I think we have to be open to both of those
In that case, I think the big
I
mistake here, the big failing on the part of the Times, is not recognizing the gender dynamics at play, not recognizing that all of this press coverage was going to happen. I hear you all chiming in there.
Not recognizing the story. They didn't recognize what the story was going to be, which is stunning. And they didn't have answers when the questions started being asked.
I also like to jump in with one really direct point in response to what Dylan just said. One of the things, we often talk much too simplistically about sexism and racism and homophobia. It's often way more complicated than she was fired because of sexism or she was fired because she was a woman in a way that then automatically makes the firing illegitimate. It is simultaneously possible for her to have been dismissed for very legitimate reasons and for those legitimate reasons to also have been threaded or viewed through a lens that was related to her gender.
Any guesses about what Jill Abramson does next?
It's very hard to tell. I think most former New York Times executive editors have had a way of sort of slowly drifting off into relative obscurity against the sort of august position that they had. Certainly Howell Raines, we no longer hear from him. Bill Keller is now doing something called the Marshall Project, which doesn't have a great deal of relevance to the daily news cycle. It's difficult to tell what Abramson will do next.
Rebecca, any prediction about what Abramson will do next?
I have no idea.
I don't think any of us do. I think that Instagram of her boxing is our only clue. Lisa, Rebecca, Dylan, thank you all for joining me.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.